All right, so it's 8:30, so we should move on to our next talk, which is being given by Timothy Gupton on informational structure and word order acceptability in, actually, I don't know how to pronounce this, Cibaeño Dominican Spanish. And so, yeah, you can start whenever you're ready. We're seeing your slides, but not hearing anything if you're speaking.
Right. Sorry. Now you can hear me, right?
Yeah, you're good now.
Sorry, I had not unmuted. All right. You don't need video of me, I assume?
No, you can leave it off if you prefer.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, it's Cibaeño Dominican Spanish. This is from the Cibao. I'll show you guys that later. At any rate, it's fairly well known that Spanish has theoretically, a flexible word order. So here we can see some various examples of word order when you have a transitive predicate like eat. So these are different versions of Juan ate an apple. So we can do SVO, we can do VOS, and we can do VSO. Where you have Juan in bold, this is a contrastive corrective sort of reading, right? So that's another permutation of SVO. And then when you have a prepositional phrase, also, right, we can get those constituents in different orders in Spanish. So here we've got Maria put the book on the table. And so we can get SVO with a PP at the end. We can do SV with a PP before the object. And then we can do a contrastively focused object with the right there, with the book right there. Okay, so now, so according to Subizarreta 98, right, word order acceptability in Spanish relates to the informational context at hand. And so information focus, according to her proposal, right, this targets the rightmost clausal edge. And this interacts with nuclear stress, which also targets the rightmost clausal edge. And so when focus and nuclear stress conflict, in other words, when they don't align, right, prosodic movement is responsible for leftward scrambling of constituents to sort of save the structure, or it's just simply not acceptable, right? And so we'll look at an example of this scrambling, right? So according to Subizarreta's proposal, right, only one C is acceptable for subject information focus. So what we want then is for nuclear stress, which is at the rightmost edge, right? That has to coincide with the focus, right, location. So here in the case of 1C, both align at the right clausal edge. So this is supposed to be acceptable. Whereas in the other cases, we don't see them aligning properly. And so those are supposed to be, pragmatically strange or odd or infelicitous, right? They just don't work in the context. So while they're not ungrammatical per se, they're definitely odd. Okay, and so so we get a similar situation in 2, right here. When we're asking what did Maria put on the table, right, we need el libro, the book, to be at the rightmost clausal edge, right, so that nuclear stress aligns with the focus. Okay, and so so what we get in 2A is that this is not happening, and this is supposedly in a in a sort of a basic word order. And so the idea is that what's happened in 2A, at least according to Subizarreta's theory, is that sobre la mesa, right, on the table, has scrambled leftward past el libro. Nothing in this proposal hinges on that, whether you believe in that scrambling or not. But regardless, what I'm testing here is Subizarreta's claims. So really, it's the testing of whether these truly have to be in alignment or not. Okay. Okay. Now, interestingly, recent empirical testing of Zubizarreta's proposal in a number of studies on Spanish in different parts of the world, right? Muntendam looked at Andean Spanish, Jimenez Fernandez looked at Andalusian Spanish, Hoot and Leal de Struhl and Hoot both looked at Mexican Spanish. I believe Hoot 2016 is Northern Mexican Spanish, but they're both Mexican varieties. The findings of these studies was that prosodic movement does not work as predicted. So this P movement, like this scrambling, you know, out of the way. And in fact, they found that this idea of prosodic movement in Zubizarreta's account does not feature prominently in participant judgments. They also found that information focus can target constituents in non-rightmost positions. So like, for example, you could target, you know, say you could have a subject information focus reply with the subject in preverbal position. And so it didn't have to be at the clausal rightmost edge. So, so what we've got here is that multiple focus related positions are available in these varieties of Spanish. So the current study on Cibaeño Dominican Spanish seeks to contribute to the experimental literature on syntax information structure and to test the empirical adequacy of Zubizarreta's account. For this, I used contextualized internet-based acceptability questionnaires, which have a 4-point Likert design with a separate I don't know option, so we don't get any other rating on the scale sort of masking or you know, is working as a de facto I don't know response. This is found to be the case with like mid-scale replies. At any rate, I wanted to test a variety of linguistic phenomena in Caribbean Spanish here. And so for all of these tests, for all of the questions that, you know, for whose data I'm presenting today, audio recordings of the sentences that were rated was provided, and this was to control for intonation following recommendations in Fodor and Kitagawa. And I'll give you some examples of that or at least, you know, what the context looked like very shortly. So why Dominican Spanish? Well, Dominican Spanish has claimed to be possibly undergoing typological change to a non-null subject language. And this is some speculation in Cameron 93, who noticed that, you know, Dominican Spanish was using a lot more overt pronouns. And he suggested that this might be similar to what happened in Old French and its move from null subject to non-null subject. Camacho and others have followed up on this idea, looking at changes in the pronoun system, and have suggested that this may be driving the typological change. Also, experimental results from 12 Dominican speakers, among other Caribbean varieties, were examined in Ortiz Lopez, and this suggested an emergence of a system with strict subject-verb order, and so getting away from the sort of relatively flexible word order in other varieties of Spanish. And this is consistent with suggestions in Toribio 2000, who suggested that, you know, it seems that, you know, Dominican Spanish has increasingly strict subject-verb word order. So the research questions guiding this study were, does Cibaeño Dominican Spanish obey the constraints proposed in Zubizarreta for romance, such that information focus is encoded via word order? And secondly, do experimental results from CDS confirm the suggestion that Dominican Spanish is becoming an increasingly fixed SVO variety of Spanish? So I had 34 participants from the CBAO, which is the northwestern portion of the Dominican Republic. They were aged 17 to 21. They were university students, all living in Santiago de los Caballeros at time of data collection. Their hometowns are represented in the map, so you can see where they're from. They're not all exclusively from Santiago de los Caballeros. They were all raised as monolingual Cibaeño Dominican Spanish speakers. I removed 22, a large number from the bigger sample that I took that was roughly 60, if they were native or early bilinguals. Amongst this population, no participant spent more than 6 months outside of the DR too. Right, so participants rated pseudo-randomized response pairs with accompanying audio of each response to control for prosody. And here I'm repeating the Kitagawa and Fodor reference. And so we've got a context which basically sets up the sentences, and this has been used in second language acquisition research to test the acceptability of different replies to questions. So we've got that you're at your parents' house when your sister comes in with a bouquet of flowers. Your mother says to her, "Well, that's how wonderful. Who gave you those flowers?" And she answers, delighted, right? Either well, with a VS response, Silvio gave me them, or an SV response, Silvio gave me them. And so for each of these contexts, right, the participant listens to the audio for the A and B responses. And here we've got the audio. And so the prediction, according to Zubizarreta, is that VS should be preferred, okay? All of these contexts were checked by native Dominican speakers to make sure that people wouldn't reject the contexts for odd reasons, or like just reject everything for like reasons of lexicon, or just it doesn't make sense in our, you know, in the cultural context. So all of this stuff was checked and piloted before the experimental testing of these with participants. Here we've got a similar, another, you know, sort of a context. Here we're using an intransitive predicate. So here you've got, you're at a meeting of your colleagues from the university. Your friend Julio leaves for a minute to go to the restroom. While he's away in the restroom, Patricia and Maite go out to buy some drinks. When Julio comes back, he notices that there are fewer people, and he asks you, "Who left?" And you answer him, right? Patricia and Maite left, don't worry. And so you can do that with VS or SV in these responses. And so according to Zubizarreta, once again, VS should be the preferred word order. Okay. Then I also had synthetic contexts where no constituent is privileged in the reply. So, so this was to find out if these other word orders were simply unacceptable in Dominican Spanish. So here the context is, you see a group of over 20 friends of yours in front of a university building, right, with your department. You ask your friend Daniel, "What's going on here, Danny?" He answers you, we're waiting for Freddie to arrive." And then the response is, right, his grandfather bought him a motorcycle and he's going to show it off for the first time. And so here you've got VOS or VSO word order. And here I didn't include SVO, and this was because of results in discussion in Leal, Destrul, and Hoot, who said that, you know, basically SVO is always acceptable. And so really to get at the acceptability of other word orders, you need SVO to not be involved. And since this was something I was really interested in testing in the Dominican context, SVO was not used as a response to these contexts. And so the prediction for this was that if word order is strict SVO, participants should reject both of these possible replies, and they should give them low ratings, right? So here we have our results. For transitive predicates, right, we have all focus. These are the thetic context, so sort of what happened, right, or what's going on. And so we've got all focus for each of these and subject narrow focus for each predicate type. Okay, so these are the basic descriptive statistics. We've got a mean acceptability rating out of a 4-point scale. And then we've got the standard deviation here. These ratings were subsequently z-normalized following recommendations in Sprouse et al. And these are analyzed using paired two-tailed t-tests. The differences with statistically significant interactions are asterisked here, and I've got the p-values following. But so what we've got then is that for transitive predicates, right, VOS was rated higher than VSO, and this was statistically significant. When you looked at SV versus VS, there was no difference for subject narrow focus contexts. So, so we see a difference for all focus contexts, but not for subject narrow focus contexts. I also looked at contrastive corrective focus, which I can talk about later if you like. That's something that's very interesting to me, so I leave this here in case somebody is interested in me talking about that. That's really not central to anything I've prepared so far. So I just left that there as a sort of reminder to myself or someone else. If they would like me to talk about it, I'm happy to. With respect to unaccusative predicates, right, we had SV was rated significantly higher than VS for subject narrow focus eliciting contexts. And we had no difference between SV and VS for all focus contexts, right? Additionally, for the unaccusative predicates, I was interested in finding out if subject animacy was responsible for any differences here, and there does seem to be some evidence of subject animacy influencing word order. So we had some, I had some stimuli with animate subjects and inanimate subjects, and it seems that with animate subjects, SV is rated higher than VS, and with inanimate subjects, VS was rated higher. So this is an interesting result. At any rate, returning to the research questions, for research question 1, Cibaeño Dominican Spanish does not, sorry, I just noticed that text in the chat, does not entirely obey Subizarreta's 98 proposal. And so it seems that in CDS, word order and intonation may mark information structure similar to findings for other varieties of Spanish. For the second research question, ratings of VSO and VOS suggest that Cibaeño Dominican Spanish does not have rigid syntax. It seems that other word orders are okay, they are acceptable. And it seems that subject animacy may influence subject position in Cibaeño Dominican Spanish. And so, you know, these are curious similarities and differences related to other, you know, varieties of Spanish. And this is, you know, what we've increasingly been looking at in, at least, you know, in generative circles as, you know, micro variation, trying to find out the minor similarities and differences between varieties of Spanish. And so this is certainly something meriting further investigation. And so this is probably one of a suite of small, you know, phenomena related to microvariation. And so these are my references. Sorry, jumping past that, I wanted to give my thanks to different individuals who were crucial in this study. And that is what I have for now. And I've left my bonus slides for later, just in case someone wants to ask about contrastive focus, because it's something that's always interesting to me, and this is part of a larger study testing a lot more things. So I will end here.
Great, thank you so much, Timothy. A really interesting experiment. it's really cool to see like discourse taken into account, since, you know, in like Savi's lab, we've been looking at different orders, say, but not necessarily with discourse. So
yeah, and it's hard to get at subject, you know, information focus in a corpus, for one, and two, it's really odd to try to get at that in, you know, in like a sociolinguistic sort of interview, because, you know, otherwise you have to ask questions you kind of already know the answer to. And that's really weird. So,
yeah, definitely. So we have plenty of time for questions. Feel free to raise a hand or type in the chat.
I guess I should, there, stop sharing. Now I can see you all.
So we've got one hand raised. Let's see. You should be live, Ariel.
Yeah, Ariel, can I?
Hi, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you too. Thank
Good.
you so much for this interesting presentation. Very interesting indeed.
Thank you.
I should acknowledge something. This is a research I would like to have done myself. No, I had this temptation many years ago when I read this article by Matt Tebon. Are you aware about this author?
Which one?
Francisco Matt Tebon.
No.
I can, maybe in the chat, I can copy you. Even if I am not sure if it is in this article, he writes about this.
Okay.
I will copy down
Yeah, thank
link
you.
in the chat. Because there isn't, okay, he has an accomplished theory for explaining all these things, among them the word order. Then all the cases you have been presenting are, I think, very clear, but there are cases which are less clear to explain. For example, I can remember one, just I'm not sure if you will find this in this article, but for example, I will write down the sample in the chat, okay?
Okay.
Just for reference. Se rompió la lavadora.
Ah, yes.
La lavadora, which is not at all a clear case, just to explain.
Yeah, and I avoided any I avoided verbs that combine with say for the purposes of this study.
Even if you ask person, when I read about this, I was just so tempted to go around asking persons. I did it on a very small scale. I worked by that time in Prague with Spanish speaking colleagues. Nobody was just sure just how it worked. They are not. I think people normally are not conscious about this. Indeed, Matt Tebon's theory. There is a factor which is not in Subizarreta, but it's a factor which is very logical and can combine with all these other factors you have been mentioning from Subizarreta, which is the integrability factor, the integrability into the context. And he claims that if a concept, a piece of information has a high degree of integrability into the context, then the possibility for this item to go in the topicalized position is higher. It means that, but you should always look into the context. It means maybe if you have been talking about this washing machine, maybe most probably if it is broken, then you will say, oh, the washing machine is broken. But this is a classical point. This is a topicalized item because of his appearance, because of his previous appearance in the context, in the discursive context. Maybe you haven't talked about this before, you are in your house, then you can integrate the concept of washing machine in your discourse, in your speech, because you are in your house, you talk to your wife, and then most probably you will say, la lavadora se rompió, with washing machine at the beginning. But if you're not in your house, then the concept of washing machine is not that, has not a high degree of integrability into any context, because you are not there, you are not in the situation.
Well, right. And if I say that to my colleague at work, well, we don't own a washing machine together. You know, there's a question of which washing machine am I referring to? Like
Yeah.
so many things
Yeah.
that don't exist in our common
And you should
ground.
introduce it. You have to switch on to switch off to an existential construction. Or,
Right. And so,
or just putting that at the end.
yes.
I don't know.
That's why I work really hard to try to get these contexts set up so that, and I gave probably rough instructions to, you know, my pilot participants in this study, my informants, you know, from the Dominican Republic who read through these for me. And I'm so indebted to them for looking at these contexts and really sort of thinking about, okay, so does this make sense? Like, you know, has this context been set up right so that, you know, you get all the right things sort of in mind? And I try to be careful with those so that, you know, I'm not leaving something as topical when I don't want it to be topical, say.
Mm-hmm. Then, no, okay, for me it was difficult just to find out somebody in the working place talking about his or her washing machine. the experiment just, the experiment collapsed.
Sure. Yeah, and you have to be careful with that, right? Doesn't make sense in the context you're setting up to. And so I tried to keep, you know, since these were all, you know, I knew my response audience, you know, my participant audience would all be university students. You know, I tried to keep those contexts related to things that, you know, might be in the world of experience of university students. So, you know, there were things like ordering food and, you know, somebody got a new motorcycle, you know, someone got, you know, whatever, flowers from a boyfriend, you know, something odd like that, you know, so, well, I guess not that odd, but yeah. Things like that might form part of that experience at that age.
Okay, if there is time for this last comment, is the reason why I switched off to the use of serials or TV shows or films as a corpus, just because it was impossible to find out in written corpora the insufficient context, the sufficient previous context to find out, to check if the theme or the object of the discourse, the item referred, had or hadn't a high degree of integrability in the context. And you need this previous context, this or the situation, just the situational context.
Yeah, fair. I mean, that's a difficulty of using that sort of corpora. I actually do have a colleague who looked at corpora, French movie corpora, and, you know, and she's gotten the question, you know, of, is this legitimate many times? And her answer is always, look, you know, like French movie audiences are pretty demanding. And if it weren't legitimate, you know, if it didn't seem realistic, people would just be hugely critical of these movie, you know, conversations and dialogues and interactions. And so, you know, but can you really get at that with information structure? I don't know.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
That's the point. That's the point. And I did at that point when I was doing my PhD, just to be clear. And then Kulioli, if you're aware of him, I will copy down this name in the chat also for future reference, maybe if you need it. Antoine Kulioli.
Okay.
He's a French linguist, enunciativist, so-called enunciativist linguist. And then he claims that it's enough for an utterance to be correct if the utterance respects the parameters of the situation. Then you are seeing a TV movie, and if the utterance follows or respects the parameters of the situation, then the utterance is correct. It's not important at this point if it is has been uttered in a film or in real life. Then I don't like movies myself so much for this, because in movies they are short, and then the control over the actor or the actress is very high, I think. In long serials, the actors are more relaxed, and
Sure.
they are allowed to speak just more informally and in a more relaxed way, as they would do in natural life, in real life. I think it's an impression of mine.
think, yeah, in line with what you're saying. I know you're trying to cut us off here because we're over time. I was going to say, you know, in line with that context, you know, everybody's used to sort of being in an apartment or a house, right? And so even if you've never seen the washing machine previously on your show or your movie, if someone asks about it, it's not going to be weird because everybody knows that most houses and apartments have washing machines, or, you know, or that it's at least within the realm of possibility that one exists in there. And so, you know, it seems that, you know, Julieli would be, you know, right in some, you know, sense there. Okay. And I get what you're saying.
At least it could be interesting to do this research you have done, maybe taking into account this other parameter, the integrability into the context.
Yeah, I will look at that. Thank you.
It was my idea, just to tell you, to share with you.
Sorry, Alex.
Maybe.
No, it's fine. Just we do need to let the interpreters go on break because
okay.
Yes, of course.
There, you can continue.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice to have you.